Yeah, so I'm Sharon. This is Sean. I'm an occupational therapist and I graduated way back in 1993. I have my ear sensory integration qualification, which is only available for OTs, speech therapists, and physiotherapists. I have a I have a charity over in Easter House, and we work with children 0 to 24 with or without a diagnosis, and we are very play-based. We basically do lots of motor activities, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that's important in a wee minute. We're going to do a wee idea of what it's like to have sensory overload. So I need 3 volunteers, please. Preferably not if you're tactile defensive or if you have vision issues. Yeah, you're going to be reading. Can I have some volunteers? Thank you. Thank you. One more, please. Right, okay. You hold that a minute, Sean. Get your wee book. Right, so Sean is going to... We don't need the mic. No, we don't need the mic for this because I'm just talking to these guys.
Okay, it's just that if we're...
It's to tell me
See this?
So Sean is going to do the book. We're going to concentrate on what he's telling you, and then we're going to ask you some questions about it. Yep. Daniel, I need you to run back and forward. Okay, and I'll... Yeah, you got that. And I'm going to give you some crazy stuff. Okay? Right. Okay, Sean, take a seat. Sorry, what's your name? Right, you have the mic. Alan is going to try and focus on Sean's reading. Now, Sean, as you've probably worked out, has Down syndrome, so you will have to concentrate really, really hard to be able to understand them. Okay? Sean. Yeah.
Today, Pippa is having a play date at her house. Pippa has invited Mandy's house and Pandoria and Peggy.
Keep writing.
The panda twins. Why don't you get some toys? Pippa, says Mummy Pig. Think about what your friends like to play with. But I don't know what my friends will want to do, sighs Pippa. Getting lost. Toys out of the cupboard to take downstairs. Don't worry, Pippa, says Tony Pig.
Thank you. Okay, how did that feel?
Yeah, it was hard to focus. There's a lot going on, so yeah.
What was the story about?
It was something about Peppa's dad talking about toys, but
Nice.
I don't know like what about the toys was going on. But yeah, that's what I got.
Perfect. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, do you think that was a comfortable experience? So when our kids go into the classroom, or when our young people go into a job interview or the dentist or anything that makes them feel uncomfortable, that is what they're experiencing when they're in sensory overload. So their heart rate goes up. They have to focus on the one thing, but quite often that one thing and all those other sensory all come at the person with sensory issues at the same level. It's called modulation. So modulation is when you can't filter out unwanted information. So your hearing, your shadows, your tactile system is all getting information at the same intensity. Hold that a minute. No, can't hold it a minute. When we get a sensation, comes into your spinal cord, comes up here to the base of our neck, where our primitive brain is. It then crosses over and passes the message on to the brain to be interpreted. Now, when we have sensory impairment, what happens is this ligand gate here doesn't open effectively, or it opens too effectively. So, hang on. I can't do it without my hands. So it goes like this, or it doesn't open at all. Thank you. So our brain is basically in three sections. We've got the primitive brain here, and it controls our 5 Fs, okay? So we've got fight, flight, fear, fawn, which is a newer sensory. It's when our kids try and please everybody. And they are the ones who go and introduce everyone, and they're always very happy, but they find it really tricky to make friends. And our 5th F, for the purpose of this, we're going to call it reproduction. So that is what our primitive brain works on. This is intrinsic to us, and although our neurodiverse population have the same brain, this part here, gets more messages. It works on our reptilian brain. The middle part of our brain works on our emotional regulation. It's what allows us to interpret how we're feeling. And the front part of our brain, which is the cognitive functioning part of our brain, tells us it's not okay to pee in public. It's what allows us to conform and social norms and things. So the likes of Sean, who has a diagnosed developmental delay, his brain is different. His primitive brain is enlarged. So we can look at a scan and it makes sense. Our neurodiverse kids, or young people, or young adults, their brain doesn't get the same messages passing. So when we're looking at sensory, if a pathway isn't working, we can't fix that pathway. What we have to do is either sensory processing, where we adapt the environment and we adapt our strategies to make it easier, or sensory integration, which is to try and create new brain pathways to overcome those challenges and to make life slightly easier so our young people can achieve the best that they can. Sorry, I got distracted there. That wasn't on the slide. I'm just going to go onto the slide. Right, Sean, get the wee gadget. You can press the next one for me. That one. Nope. Where am I pointing? Me and technology do not work well together. There we go. Okay, so this is just a wee bit of basically an summary of what we've just done. Our sensory integration influences how our brain works. Air's sensory integration is the sort of the founder of this, and she developed this concept in 1972, where she herself was on the spectrum and realized that her brain worked differently to most. Her brain really worked well on patterns. She was fascinated to know why, and she was the founder of sensory integration. Okay, so very basically, you'll all know this probably. We have 8 sensory systems called the Magnificent 8. So back when I was a kid, we had 5. We had touch, smell, taste, sight, and sound. We now have vestibular, which is our balance, and it's controlled by the fluid in our inner ear. It allows us to know when we're moving, when we're stationary. As human beings, we don't sit still. We get sensation of feeling safe by movement. Our kids or young people who need intense movement and rhythm, it generally is because the fluid in their inner ear isn't responding as we would expect. Okay, proprioception is probably the one that's the easiest to spot. It's clumsy, uncoordinated, young people who like to throw themselves, who like to bang, crash, rough play, pick up a cup and a plastic cup and squash it because they've used too much force, or write with a pencil and break the nib every single time. So proprioceptive is really intrinsic to being able to function in the environment. And then we have interoception. Interoception is how we understand what our body is telling us. So young Sean here is a perfect example. When he is hungry, he describes a bubble in his tummy. When he is angry, he describes bubbles in his tummy. So he'll be fighting with his dad and he'll come stomping down the stairs and he'll go, I need a piece. I'm like, no, you don't, Sean. I'm starving. Like, no, you don't. You're angry. I got bubbles in my tummy. So we've been working with him for about 5 years, trying to get post-it notes to get him to identify and trying to do the what happened before, what happened after. But that's because his interoceptive system's not working. It's one that also controls our bladder and bowel. So in addition to having fear of sitting on the toilet, which a lot of our young people do, they also don't recognize it. They don't actually have the urge to go to the toilet. So it's like, okay, why am I sitting here terrified? There's nothing in this for me. So we try and turn it into ways that make it a bit more meaningful for them. Okay, this is probably too easy for you, but anybody fancy having a guess at what sensory system? So you've got a young person who climbs all over the furniture, up on the windowsill, hanging off the light shades, running up and down, constantly on the go, can't sit still, can't even have his breakfast without being able to spin round in circles. What sensory system do we think that is? Yeah. Vestibular. It's the fluid in our inner ear. And the reason that the young person's doing this is because when they're sat still, they're not getting that gentle flow that keeps them safe. So they're needing everything much, much bigger, much more advanced, just to feel safe. So we try and sit them still. It's like, hey, what are you doing, mate? This is no good. I don't feel safe in my own body here. Okay, cover their ears at a birthday party. Anybody? Yeah, our auditory system. So when we talk about our auditory system, it's really important to know that that's not the same as hearing. So our sensory system, our eyes and our ears and our taste have nothing to do with the mechanics of how they work. So I'm terrible. I have no visual perception skills at all. I can't do anything more than a 12-piece insert puzzle. And that's my visual perception. My eyes work fine. My optic nerve sends a message to my brain. I have reading glasses, but that's all. But my visual perception, my ability to understand what I see is impaired. And again, this is really crucial for our kids. If we're asking them to put their clothes on and they've got things laid out and it's maybe all folded up and they can't actually work out it's a t-shirt, they're going, it's right in front of you. I can't see it. Put the sleeves in and they're like, oh, there's a t-shirt. And that's visual perception issues. Why I'm talking about that when we're talking about ears is another issue. I also probably am a little bit neurospicy. Okay, refuses certain foods or textures. Absolutely. Well done, Angela. So most people say that's a taste one, but it could absolutely be tactile as well. Our kids who can't handle different textures in their mouth, it is generally to do with our tactile system. When we're an infant and we're learning to eat solid foods, we expand our gag reflex. Our reflex starts at the tip of your tongue and works their way back. For a lot of our young people, anything that doesn't go down easily feels like a foreign object and puts their brain into a fight or flight state. So asking them to eat something that they're like, hey ho, I don't know what that is, that seems unsafe to me, can be really traumatic. So they're just some simple examples of how difficult and how challenging it can be to have sensory issues. You might think, oh, it's only we put ear defenders on and that'll solve the problem, but a lot of the time it's a lot more complex, right, Sean? Okay, now this is one I don't know if you've all seen, but this is my absolute Bible when it comes to the sensory system. So when we're developing, if we don't have our sensory system integrated, it impacts on every single aspect of our life. It's like building a house on a foundation of concrete as opposed to building a house on sand. We need the foundation to be really, really solid before we can then work on the higher principles. So if I have a family come to me and they're like, right, they're not concentrating in school, they're getting into trouble, they're pushing their friends, they're not eating their dinner, they're on a beige diet, and I go, okay, we're going to get them on the swing. Like, what? And I'm like, and sometimes it's easy for me because I'm like, right, I know that we need to get the vestibular system working. If the vestibular system's not working, then nothing else is going to work. We can't work on social skills if we don't know we're safe in our own body. So we have to, absolutely have to, get the vestibular, the proprioceptive, and the tactile system integrated. Everything else cannot be fully accomplished until we get that sorted. And it's great because they three things can be done in play so easily. Even as an adult, rock climbing. Rock climbing is one of the best strategies. Sean, could you crawl through that tunnel for me? The wee bism's done it right this time. So normally Sean can't do asymmetrical movement and struggles to crawl, which means that he struggles to follow instruction from the teacher. Go sit over there. I can go like this. I don't have to move my body. A lot of our young people have to go like this. That's exhausting. So we need to be able to do that. If we tell a 22-year-old to do that, they're going to tell me to take a hike. But if we tell them to go rock climbing, we're getting the exact same motion, and it's fun. It's our play. It's our occupation. And we're turning it into a productive activity that's going to be meaningful. Our cognitive and intellectual is the tip of what we're achieving. So when we set goals for our young people, we need to be aware of where they're at in terms of their sensory capacity, because there is no point in setting them a goal that they are not going to be able to achieve. Like, so a young person with major auditory problems and tactile, they're not going to be able to go and work in a factory because there's going to be too much noise, there's going to be too many people coming and going, and their brain is going to be in a constant state of fight or flight. So what they're going to do is they're either going to go and they're going to put their head down and they're going to work and then they're going to come home and they're going to go pew, or they're going to go and they're going to just end up in sensory overload and throw everything and throw the dummy out the pram. Looks like bad behaviour. The brain, the primitive brain, has taken over, and at that moment in time, they are not responsible for their action because that primitive brain for survival is tapped in and they're not able to manage. Okay, next one, Sean. Anybody with questions on that can ask later on. So we've got our, I've just put out the sensory seekers and sensory avoiders because I literally could talk for about 10 hours on this, but you would be bored silly. So sensory seekers are often confused with our young people or our adults with low registration. Low registration and sensory seeking present very, very similarly. They are constantly on the move. They've got their fans and everything. They eat. Everything's spicy. They jump. They spin. They wander. And low registration is when their body is just not getting the feedback. So what they're doing is they're doing all this big movement, and it looks like, whoa, they're sensory seeker. But what it actually is telling us is, well, actually, this is all too much for me. I don't know what I'm feeling, so I'm going to take everything in the hope that something sticks. Avoiders can be our young people who look like they're depressed. They look like they're anxious. They don't want to leave the house. They would rather be in their bed in their safe zone than out and about, because being out and about is terrifying. When you don't understand your own body and you don't understand how it reacts to the environment, why would you put yourself through that? Nobody would choose to do that. Again, we've talked about the sort of common things of going somewhere, whether it be work or school or grannies, and coming home and then everything just kicks off. You tell them to put the kettle on and all of a sudden you're the worst mum in the world. And it's because they're in their safe space. Their brains came out of fight or flight, and they need to have these emotions to go somewhere, to do something. That's when we, in schools, they quite often will put strategies in place after this point. What we want to do is to get our sensory system working throughout the day so that we don't get to that. We actually don't want anybody to mask, even though sometimes it's a lot easier. Oh, you've been a good boy in school today. Well done. Let's just ignore what's happened when we get home. And that's exhausting for the kids as well. It's not a comfortable place to be. So the takeaway from that is it is not bad behaviour. It's the quote, the superhero training's gone awry. They've had a wee slip, but their brain's telling them that. And it's understanding that not bad behaviour. If you take nothing away from this, but the fact that our young people with these sensory issues are more often than not in control, especially when they're dysregulated. Okie dokie. So, sensory diets. Sensory diets are a love-hate relationship for me. You go online and you get these sensory diets. Everybody's seen them. A fidget toy's the answer to everything, isn't it? If you've got somebody who is getting overstimulated visually, giving them a fidget spinner is the worst possible thing to do, because you're feeding into the thing that makes them dysregulated. So when we're thinking about a sensory diet, it needs to be knowing what triggers, knowing what works for your young person or yourself, and then making it work effectively. Proprioception, so deep pressure, is never going to have a negative effect. The faster you do it, the more alerted you get. the more impact you do, the calmer you get. So slow and hard is for calming, fast and vibrant is for alerting in general. Watch for cues. So I'm at that age where I don't know how my mood's going. I'm like, woo! But there's normally a pattern. Somebody's triggered me. There will be something. I've had so many teachers say, and they just kicked off for absolutely no reason. And no reason has been evident, but a fly might have landed on them, and they've maybe gone off because they can't make sense of that. Our brain is programmed, if a fly lands on us, back when we were our ancestors, fly lands on you, it could poison you and kill you. So you swipe it away. And this is what happens when we don't understand. Generally, there is a trigger. We just need to try and work it out what it is. The closer we look, there's all these strategies about plotting. I've got a couple of examples on there. Watching what happens before and then what happens after. One of the things that you may or may not know is sometimes when we're talking about the sensory system and our young people with neurodiversity, yesterday could be yesterday. Yesterday could have been 3 years ago, and something's triggered that thought, and their brain has gone back to that emotion that they had in that moment. And like we're sitting there going, what? Why are you talking about that? That was weeks ago. But for them, it could have happened 10 minutes ago. So it's to validate that as well, rather than saying, oh, come on, get over it. So just be aware of that. I think we're nearly there, right, Sean? Sorry, as I said, I do get carried away. So when is it important to actually go and get help? And I'm guessing because you're here that you've tried all the basic strategies that are available from Google. There's some lovely advice on Google. When they are not working, or when they are actually causing more distress than benefit, then it's time to ask for help. Now, the main difference between NHS OT and sensory integration OT is that the NHS do brilliant resources on sensory processing. So they will give you strategies such as, if you're going to the dinner hall and it's too noisy, wear a pair of ear defenders. If you've got visual overstimulation, take everything off the wall. There are some amazing strategies available freely for that. Sensory integration is a different process. It's about creating new brain pathways. There's a lot of people out there just now that are claiming to do sensory integration. Look for the A if you're going down that route, because there are certificates that are being done in 6 weeks and called sensory integration. So if you're looking at sensory integration, look for air sensory integration. You're getting somebody who theoretically knows what they're talking about. I'm putting myself in the theoretically. Okay. And that is it. There are some really good resources online. Trust your instinct. If you're beginning to spot that a kid's or a young person or even an older person is beginning to have a meltdown, don't approach them. Don't try and ask them what's wrong. Walk away, give them space, come back to it. Because when the brain is dysregulated, it's not in control. The worst thing you can do to somebody who is in that state where they're like, get away from me, get away from me, get away from me, is say, what's wrong? Look at everything good. You're like, you're going to get punched. So, yeah, be aware of that, right? I think the next one might be, yeah, your role as a parent. So I'm guessing most of you here are parents or carers. Remember to celebrate the small victories. They might not be that big a deal for us as a community. Sean took a year, didn't you, to learn a two-wheeler bike? We had a party. We were like, yeah! For a young person, being able to sit on a bus, woohoo! That's a challenge. That's something to be really proud of when they achieve. Be patient, easier said than done. Especially when we don't understand what's happened. It's a bit like the trauma-informed stuff. We need to understand what's happening, and sometimes the best thing to do is walk away because you're like, I ain't going to get it. So I'm just going to let you have this wee episode, and you might never know yourself what's happened, and your young person or person you're working with might not know what's happened. Walk away, come back to it. It's not the end of the world. Develop your own sensory strategies, especially if your young person can communicate with you and can, when they're not dysregulated, tell you what makes them happy, what makes them angry, what makes them sad. Just try and remember that, and then do strategies of proprioception. Honestly, I can't stress that highly enough. Throughout the day, before they go to school in the morning, before breakfast, before anything that's challenging. If you're taking them to church, make sure that they've had lots of high energy, jumpy, before you expect them to sit down and listen. Sitting on your hands is another really good one. For our older people, like pretending that you need the toilet and doing this is actually really good, and it's socially acceptable. Because what we want is we want our young people not to have a big label going, do, do, do. We want everybody to be comfortable. Yes, we need to be aware, but we also want to engage in community, not have this big red light going, woo. And remember, we're not trying to fix. We're not going to fix kids. We're going to understand them, and we're going to help them to be the best versions of themselves that they can. And I will be over in that corner if there's any questions. Thank you.